The rain fell like a cold curtain. Jake walked alone through the forest path, his coat soaked and his flashlight flickering. He had taken this trail many times, but tonight felt different. There was something in the air, something watching. He stopped when he heard it, a small, weak sound, like a cry, not a human cry. Not even like a dog or cat. It was soft and trembling. Coming from a bush near the path, Jake stepped closer, his boots sinking in the wet mud. He pushed the bush aside carefully and gasped. There, curled in the leaves, was a small creature. It had fluffy white fur, large ears, and glowing blue eyes. Its tiny body was shaking, completely soaked in the rain. It looked at him with fear, but didn't try to run. Jake knelt beside it and slowly reached out his hand. "It's okay," he whispered. "I won't hurt you." The creature sniffed his fingers and let out a soft whimper. Without thinking, Jake scooped it up and tucked it inside his coat. The creature didn't resist. It was cold, weak, and clearly in need of help. Jake held it close to his chest and hurried back to his cabin. The cabin was small, but warm, hidden. Deep in the woods, Jake placed the creature on a towel by the fireplace. He lit the fire and sat beside it, drying the little thing gently. It stared at him, not blinking, as if trying to understand who he was. Jake smiled and gave it some water and a bit of bread. To his surprise, it drank and nibbled quietly. Its blue eyes never left his face. "You're not from around here, are you?" Jake said, half joking. The creature tilted its head, almost like it understood him. That made Jake pause, but he shook the thought away. Maybe it was just smart, like some animals. He gave it a blanket and made a small bed on the couch. Later that night, as Jake read by the fire, the lights suddenly flickered. The radio turned on by itself, playing a static noise. Jake stood up, confused, and looked around. The creature was gone. He searched the room, heart pounding. Then he heard a creak behind him. He turned and froze. A girl stood in the middle of his cabin. She looked about 16. With long white hair and glowing blue eyes, she wore nothing but his oversized hoodie, the same one he had left near the couch. Her skin was pale, and her hands trembled as she looked at him. Jake stepped back, shocked. Who are you?" he asked, voice shaking. The girl opened her mouth but said nothing. Instead, she pointed at the empty towel where the creature had been. Jake looked at her, then at the towel, then back at her. "No way," he whispered. You were that thing." The girl nodded slowly, her eyes full of sadness. Jake couldn't believe it. Was this some trick? A dream? He pinched his arm, mid-hurt. This was real. The girl took a step forward, then stopped. She pointed at her chest, then at his heart. Then she placed her hand on her own lips, then on his. Jake didn't understand, but he felt something. A strange warmth inside him. It was like she was speaking to him, but not with words. He sat down slowly, trying to stay calm. "Okay," he said softly. "You're not human, are you?" The girl didn't answer, but the look in her eyes told him everything. She wasn't from Earth, and she needed help. Jake didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was clear. His quiet life in the forest was over. Everything had changed. The moment he found her in the rain and deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. Jake didn't sleep that night. Even after the fire died and the cabin went quiet, his eyes stayed wide open. The strange girl was lying on the couch, curled under a blanket, her white hair glowing faintly in the moonlight. She looked peaceful now, but Jake's mind was far from calm. He kept staring at her, trying to understand what had happened just hours ago. She was a trembling animal in the rain, no bigger than a cat. Now she was a teenage girl, silent, soft, and completely alien. He didn't know what she was or how she had changed. All he knew was that she had trusted him. When the first light of morning touched the windows, Jake finally stood up. He walked to the kitchen. Trying to act normal, his hands shook as he poured a glass of water. Behind him, he heard movement. He turned slowly. The girl was awake, sitting up, watching him with those glowing blue eyes. She didn't speak, just tilted her head like before. Her expression was calm, but Jake saw questions in her eyes, questions she couldn't ask with words. "Are you hungry?" he asked. The girl blinked once, then gave a small nod. He placed a plate of toast and eggs in front of her. She stared at the food for a moment, then carefully picked up a fork and began eating. She moved slowly, almost like she had never used utensils before. Jake sat across from her, unsure what to say. She was clearly intelligent, but there was something strange about how fast she was learning. Every time she watched him do something, she copied it perfectly the next. Moment after breakfast, Jake tried to ask her more questions. "Do you remember anything?" he asked. "Your name? Where you're from?" She looked down, avoiding his eyes. Then she pointed at herself, then at him, and then made a small heart shape with her fingers. Jake frowned, not understanding. She repeated the motion, slower this time. Herself, him, heart. Was she saying she trusted him? Liked him? Needed help? Jake smiled nervously and said, "Okay. I guess we're friends now." She smiled too, just a little. Then she stood up and walked over to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines of the old books. She paused. At one, pulled it out and flipped through the pages as if she could read. Jake's eyes widened. "You? You can read English?" She didn't reply, but she pointed at a page with stars and planets drawn on it. Her finger landed on an image of a spiral galaxy, and her eyes glowed brighter. Suddenly, Jake's radio buzzed, even though it wasn't. Turned on, a strange voice whispered through the statics, something in a language he didn't know. The girl froze, her body tense. She turned to Jake and rushed over. Grabbing his hand, she looked scared now. She placed his hand over her chest. Where her heart should be, he felt a strange warmth through her skin, a gentle thrum like soft electricity. Then, as if through his own mind, he saw something, not a dream, but a vision. Stars exploding, ships flying, a planet burning. He saw her tiny, in a glowing chamber surrounded by tall, masked figures. She was escaping, changing, becoming small. Like the creature he had found, Jake pulled his hand away, gasping. His head spun as if he had seen a lifetime in seconds. She looked at him with sad eyes, and then finally placed a hand on her chest and tapped it twice. "Lyra," she whispered. Her first word. Jake whispered it back. "Lyra?" She smiled and nodded. He had a name now, and maybe that meant he had a purpose too. Just then, tires crunched outside. Jake froze, and Lyra rushed to the window. Pulling the curtain just a crack, a black van sat at the edge of the trees, its doors opening slowly. 3 men in dark suits stepped out, scanning the area with devices in their hands. Jake's heart pounded. He didn't know who they were, but he knew what they wanted. Lyra backed away from the window, shaking her head. Jake grabbed her hand and whispered, "Don't worry, I won't let them take you." The girl looked at him with eyes full of trust. Outside, the men moved closer to the cabin, and inside, 2 beings, 1 human. 1 not stood side by side, ready for whatever came next. The sound of knocking shattered the quiet like a hammer through glass. Jake didn't move, neither did Lyra. The 2 stood frozen in the middle of the small cabin, eyes locked, breathing quiet but fast. "Open the door, sir," a cold voice called. From outside, "We're with Earth's Defense Agency." Jake didn't believe them. Their suits looked too perfect, too clean for agents who worked in forests. He motioned to Lyra to hide. A piece Sue's already gone melted into the shadows like smoke. He opened the door only a crack. "Morning," he said carefully. "Can I help you?" The lead man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "There was an object in this area last night," the man said. "A fallen star, some locals say. Maybe just space junk." Jake played dumb. "I didn't see anything," he replied. "Just rain and thunder." Another man peeked inside over his shoulder. "Anyone else in the cabin?" "Nope," Jake said, blocking the view with his shoulder. "Just me and my bad coffee." The three men exchanged looks, then handed him a black card. "If you see anything unusual, anything at all, call this number." Jake nodded and shut the door before they could say more. As soon as the door closed, he turned around. Lyra wasn't in the room. But the blanket on the couch moved slightly. He pulled it back, and there she was. Tiny again, the soft animal form curled tightly in the fabric. Jake knelt beside her, his voice low. "They're looking for you, aren't they?" She opened one eye, glowing faintly, and nodded once. She was scared, and Jake could feel it. Even though she didn't speak, her presence filled the room like a quiet signal. He gently lifted her up and placed her in his coat again. "You're not safe here," he whispered. "But I'll protect you, I promise." He packed quickly flashlight, food, warm clothes, and the strange black box she had brought with her. It hadn't opened yet, but whenever he touched it, it buzzed softly, like something inside was alive, with Lyra hidden in his jacket. He left the cabin and disappeared into the trees. Hours passed as they climbed the hills deeper into the forest. Jake's breath came heavy, but he kept going. Lyra poked her little head out of his coat now and then, as if watching for danger. They found a cave behind a waterfall place Jake knew from childhood. It was cold, but hidden well. He started a fire with shaking hands. The moment they were safe inside, Lyra changed again. This time, her shift was slower, more painful. Jake watched in awe and fear as her small form stretched, her bones reshaping. She curled up by the fire. Now fully in her girl form again, coughing softly, her skin glowed faintly blue, and there was something pulsing in her chest. Jake noticed it for the first time. Like a soft light beneath the skin, a small circle near her heart, glowing and humming like a machine. "Lyra," he said gently, "what is that?" She looked at him, reached for his hand, and placed it over the circle. The moment he touched her skin, it was like a door opened inside his mind. He saw things, not clearly, but like dreams underwater. Stars moving in strange patterns, voices speaking in electric tones, a giant metal city floating in space, and a young girl in a glass chamber, her Lyra. She was made, not born, built from both flesh and energy, sent to Earth as a spy, a seed, a test, but something went wrong. She crashed, lost her memory, and her system reset into animal form. Jake pulled his hand back, breath shaking. You're not just an alien," he whispered. "You're a living machine." Lyra nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. She wasn't supposed to become human. She wasn't supposed to feel, but she did, and now she was being hunted for it. Jake moved closer, wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. "You're not a thing, Lyra," he said. "You're someone." She looked up at him, surprised, then slowly. She rested her head on his shoulder. Outside, the wind howled through the forest. Inside the cave, the fire cracked quietly and deep in the woods. 3 black-suited men followed a blinking device, one that had just found Lyra's signal again. Asterisk, the signal pulsed once, then again, louder, stronger. The men in black stopped walking, their handheld device now glowing bright red. One of them tapped the screen, frowning. "She's close," he muttered. Another man looked up toward the hills, where the waterfall roared like distant thunder. "I don't like this," he said. "The readings aren't stable." "Doesn't matter," the leader snapped. "We bring her in dead or alive." Far above them, hidden behind cold stone and rushing water, Lyra sat by the fire, silent. Jake boiled water in an old pan. His back turned, but Lyra's eyes stared into the flames without blinking. Something inside her had changed. Her hands were trembling again, not from fear, but from something rising inside her. Her heart pulsed. With soft blue light and the circle on her chest hummed with power, she could feel them. They were coming. Jake noticed her stare. He walked over and knelt in front of her. "What is it?" he asked softly. Lyra didn't speak, but she grabbed a piece of charcoal from the fire pit and began to draw on the stone floor. Circles, lines, symbols, a ship, a girl, a planet. Jake watched as the picture formed a story in symbols, and at the end of the drawing, a human hand holding an alien one, surrounded by stars. "You're trying to tell me something?" he whispered. Lyra nodded, then pointed at the fire. She opened her hand, and a small blue flame floated above her palm. Jake leaned back, shocked. That's not fire," he said. Lyra shook her head slowly, then closed her hand. The light vanished. Jake realized something terrifying. She wasn't just a machine or an alien. She was a weapon. A low beep echoed through the cave. Jake turned. Confused, Lyra stood up fast and grabbed his arm, pulling him away from the fire. The beep grew louder, sharper. Then the cave wall exploded. Rocks flew everywhere. Jake shielded Lyra with his body as smoke filled the cave. Through the dust, red lights danced. The men in black stepped through, weapons drawn, faces cold. "Target confirmed." One of them said, "Return her to the lab." Jake stood in front of Lyra, fists clenched. "You're not taking her," he growled. The man aimed his weapon. "You're only human," he replied. "Step aside." Lyra stepped forward, her bare feet silent on the stone. She raised her hand slowly. The glowing circle on her chest lit up like a star. The men hesitated. Then she spoke, not in words, but in sound. A pulse of energy rang out like a bell underwater. The men dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, screaming, their minds flooded with images only Lyra could send. She showed them pain, memory, and the truth of who she was, a child built for war, now fighting for her own soul. Jake watched in awe. He could barely stand the pressure in the air. Lyra lowered her hand, and the men fell silent, unconscious. She fell to her knees too, breathing hard. Jake rushed to her and held her close. Her skin was burning with energy, her hair floating slightly like it was underwater. "You didn't kill them," he whispered. "You just stopped them." She nodded weakly. Jake held her tighter. The cave flickered with the last of her glow, and far above them, in orbit, a much larger ship received the signal. "She's active," a voice said on the bridge, "and not alone." The hunt was far from over, but Jake had made a choice. He would not run anymore. If they wanted Lyra, they would have to go through him, and this time she would fight back too. The cave was quiet again. Smoke drifted through the air, and the fire was long dead. Jake sat beside Lyra, his arms wrapped around her as she rested. Her face was pale, her chest rising slowly. She hadn't spoken since the pulse. Jake could still hear the ringing in his ears. He stared at the three men lying on the ground, unconscious, their weapons scattered like toys. None of them moved, but Jake knew they wouldn't sleep forever. Lyra stirred, her fingers twitching in his hand. Her eyes opened slightly, glowing faint and soft like a dying ember. "I saw them," she whispered, barely a sound. "They wanted to cut me open." Jake's throat tightened. "They're not going to touch you again," he said. "I promise." She sat up slowly, her hand shaking as she touched the circle. On her chest, "I was made in a lab," she whispered, grown like a flower, watched every second. Jake listened without a word. "I had no voice, no name, only a code," she said. "They called me Subject 9. Jake flinched. "That's not your name," he said. "You're Lyra." She looked at him, eyes wide, and for the first time, she smiled without fear. They told me I was made to learn. To change, to survive, she said. But I did something they didn't expect. She placed her hand on his chest. I felt, she whispered. Jake closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't know how to explain it, but he felt it too. Something inside him had changed the moment he met her. She was part machine, part alien, but she was more human than the people hunting her. Lyra looked at the men again, then back at Jake. They'll send more, she said. Bigger ones, stronger ones. Jake nodded. Then we need help, he said, but not from the government. He stood up and began packing what little they had left. Lyra tried to stand, but stumbled. Jake caught her before she fell. You need rest, he said. I'll carry you. She didn't argue. She just leaned into him, her small hand gripping his coat. They left the cave before sunrise, slipping into the shadows of the trees. Hours passed, and the forest grew darker and colder. Jake knew only one person who might help them, someone who owed him a favor from long ago. They reached a hidden bunker, carved into a mountain wall. Jake knocked 3 times, then paused, then knocked twice more. A hatch opened, and a face appeared. Old, wrinkled, but sharp-edged. Jake, the man said, is that you? It's me, Eli, Jake replied, and I need a place to hide. The door opened, and they stepped inside. Eli stared at Lyra for a long time. Jake waited, unsure if he'd be kicked out or worse. Finally, Eli said, she's not from Earth, is she? Jake shook his head. She's more than that, he said. She's running from people who made her, and now they want her dead. Eli nodded slowly. Then you're both in danger, he said. Come in, and don't touch anything glowing. The bunker was filled with strange tech-old alien parts, blinking lights and humming machines. Eli was an ex-engineer who once worked on secret alien recovery missions. Now he lived alone, forgotten by the world, but his mind was still sharp, and his secrets ran deep. Lyra sat quietly on a metal bench while Jake explained everything. When Eli saw the circle on her chest, he froze. That's not just energy, he said. That's a star core. Jake frowned. What does that mean? Eli looked at him with a mixture of fear and awe. It means she's not just a machine, he said. She's a living power source. Jake looked at Lyra, who seemed confused. You were built to power something, Eli continued. A weapon, a gate, maybe even a ship. Lyra shook her head slowly. No more, she said. I'm not theirs anymore. Eli nodded. Then we'll protect you, he said. But if they find you again, they'll come with fire. Just then, the monitors blinked red. An alert flashed across the screen, multiple ships entering Earth's orbit. Jake clenched his fists. They've found us again, he whispered. Lyra looked up, her glowing eyes full of light and sorrow. Then I will fight, she said, but not to destroy. Jake placed his hand over hers. Not to destroy, he agreed. To survive, and far above, in the black sky, the hunters prepared to land. But this time, Lyra was no longer alone. The night sky cracked open with light. Ships, not like the ones from Earth, fell toward the forest like burning stars. They made no sound until they landed, but when they did, the trees shook and the wind screamed. Eli's bunker trembled as the ground above was torn apart. Inside, Jake loaded the last weapon he could find, a strange rifle built from both human and alien tech. He didn't know how to use it perfectly, but he didn't care. Lyra stood beside him, calm, her long white hair floating slightly even with no wind. She was different, now taller, stronger, eyes brighter than ever before. Eli tapped at his console, his hands shaking. There are 3 ships, heavily armored, he said, and they're scanning for her. Lyra stepped forward and touched the screen. She closed her eyes, and the machines flickered. She can hear them, Eli whispered. They're speaking through signals, not words. Jake looked at Lyra. "You don't have to go," he said. "We'll hide, run, survive somehow." Lyra shook her head. "If I keep running, others will suffer," she said. "I have to stop them here." She turned toward the steel door, and it hissed open like it feared her. Jake followed, rifle in hand, outside. The night was red with light from the ships, their spotlights sweeping the trees like hungry eyes. One of the ships opened, and a figure stepped out, tall, armored. Its face hidden behind a black mask. It raised a weapon and pointed at Lyra without hesitation. She didn't move. Jake stepped in front of her. "Stay back," he shouted. "You'll have to go through me first." The masked figure tilted its head. "Human," it said coldly, "you are nothing." Jake didn't answer. Instead, he pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked hard, sending a bolt of blue light crashing into the enemy's armor. It sparked, hissed, but didn't fall. More enemies appeared from the other ships. 6, 10, maybe more. They moved fast, silent, weapons ready. Lyra raised her hands, and the ground beneath her feet lit up. Rings of light spread out like ripples in water. Energy burst from her chest, bright and sharp. It knocked the nearest enemies back, but she stumbled. Jake caught her before she hit the ground. "You're hurting yourself," he said. "You're using too much." She looked at him, breathing hard. "I can't hold back," she said. "Not anymore." The sky above them shimmered. A beam of light came down from one of the ships. It wasn't a weapon. It was a signal, something ancient, something calling to her. Lyra stood slowly and stepped into the beam. Jake reached out, but Eli held him back. "She has to do this," he said. "This is her moment in the beam." Lyra began to change. Her skin glowed like glass. Her body stretched into its final form, tall, elegant, covered in soft light. She floated above the ground, arms raised, eyes shining with 1,000 stars. The enemies fired at her, but the beams melted before they touched her. She sent out a wave of energy not to destroy, but to stop. Every enemy froze, weapons falling, heads bowed. As if they saw something greater than fear, Jake stepped into the light, shielding his eyes. "Lyra," he called out, "come back to me." She turned to him, smiling sadly. "I remember everything now," she said. "What I am, why I was made, what they wanted me to be." He reached out his hand. "But you're not what they made," he said. "You're who you chose to become." She floated down, her light dimming slightly when her feet touched the ground again. She was still glowing, but her body was solid, real. She took Jake's hand, and he felt no heat this time, only peace. The remaining enemies dropped to their knees and vanished into dust. The ships above cracked, then exploded in silence, like paper burning in space. Only stars remained above them. Blinking softly, Eli stepped forward, wiping tears from his old eyes. "You just ended a war," he said. Before it could begin, Lyra turned to Jake and placed her forehead against his. "No more hiding," she whispered. "Now, we build something better," and far in the dark, unseen by any eyes, a final signal escaped the stars. It carried Lyra's name, her choice, her evolution, and a warning. The lost child had awakened, and she was not alone. The sky no longer burned, the ships were gone, the ground no longer shook, and silence returned to the forest. But everything had changed. Jake sat near the fire again, but it wasn't the same old fire from his cabin. This one burned blue, soft, and clean, powered by energy he couldn't explain. Lyra stood a few feet away, watching the stars like they were calling her home. Her body still shimmered faintly, but she looked more human than ever, not because of her form, but because of the way she stood with hope. With warmth, she turned and looked at Jake, her eyes glowing gently. "This world was never meant to see me," she said, "but now it knows I exist." Jake nodded, his voice quiet. "They'll come again," he said. "Won't they?" Yes, Lyra replied, but next time I won't be alone. Eli stepped out of the bunker, holding a small device in his hands. He handed it to Lyra without saying a word. She took it, turned it over, and it unfolded in her palm like a flower of light. Jake leaned in, staring at it. What is it? He asked. A seed, Eli answered. Not for war, for life. Lyra placed it gently into the earth. The ground pulsed once, then again, and slowly. Something began to grow. Not a plant, not quite, but a glowing root of light that spread. Across the soil-like veins, Jake watched, speechless. It's waking up the old network, Lyra said. The one buried long before humans walked here. Jake glanced at Eli, who just shrugged. I only knew stories, the old man said. Never thought they were true. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt soft now. The forest that had once hidden them now shimmered with strands of light. The trees stood taller. The wind carried music no one had written. Everything felt alive, different, but not broken. Jake sat next to Lyra as she placed her hand on the glowing roots. This planet isn't just dirt and stone, she whispered. It remembers? Jake nodded. And now it remembers you. She turned to him, reaching out. I don't want to leave, she said, even if the stars call me. Jake took her hand gently. Then stay, he said. We'll protect this place. Together. Lyra smiled. The kind of smile that could heal wounds without words. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. I used to think I was just a machine. She whispered, something built, not born. Jake touched her cheek softly. You're not, he said. You're a miracle. A soft hum filled the air. From the hills, lights began to rise, teeny orbs, floating slowly like fireflies made of memory. They danced around Lyra and Jake, brushing their skin like whispers, and above them, the stars blinked like they were watching. No longer distant, no longer cold. Lyra stood, her body calm, her voice stronger than ever. If anyone comes, she said, I will greet them, not as a weapon, but as a guardian. Jake stood beside her, still holding her hand. And I'll stand with you. Human or not, they didn't need armies. They didn't need escape. They had each other. And that was enough to begin something new. Far away across galaxies, ancient machines stirred as the signal reached them. The lost creation had chosen love over control, life over duty, and now the stars had a new story to tell. The story of a little creature, saved in the rain, who became something more than anyone had imagined, and the human, alone in the woods. Who gave her a reason to stay?